Without any further ado, welcome to today's webinar. It's great to have you with us. Let's go ahead and get started. We're talking about how to pass the CompTIA SecurityX exam, formerly known as the CASP. Right? They had a little rebranding here as they went from version 4 of the test to version 5. We'll actually talk a little bit too here towards the end of the day of how it changed and evolved between these versions. Um, In some ways, big changes. In other ways, not so much. Depends on your perspective. An interesting conversation, though, to have, and we'll save that for towards the end. Basically, today's webinar, we aim to discuss the exam itself. So we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown of the different domains, what's part of each of the 4 domains, and like what is expected of us. We're going to talk about the test's format. I think you should know what the format of the test is before you take it. If you've taken other CompTIA exams, it'll be very familiar, but alas, there are some changes. PBQ stuff. Yes, the performance-based questions, the dreaded simulations. We're going to talk about those, and we're going to talk about how this test uniquely, unlike all the other CompTIA tests, also has, well, a virtual simulation, a virtual machine exercise as part of it, which is pretty cool. And it could have more than one of those, but you're guaranteed at least one. We'll talk about that. And the strategies on how to combat and approach those, because I don't know if you've seen these types of questions, but sometimes they're a bit overwhelming. In fact, most of the time they're overwhelming. You know, oh my God, what is all this stuff on the screen? So we'll talk about some strategies to approach those and make them a little bit more digestible, a little bit more approachable. Got some test prep notes, some sort of thoughts about how to best prep for the test, and the mention of a couple resources to go along with this, but also more than a few pitfalls I've seen over the years when it comes to test prep and what to kind of avoid. When I think you should take the test, and I think that goes along with the test prep discussion, the differences between the old test CASP or version 4 and our today SecurityX version 5. And then they'll have you have a whole bunch of time for questions and answers, right? So I'm here to help. I want to help however I can. So we're gonna make sure there's plenty of time here at the end to discuss whatever you'd like to chat about. Nevertheless, glad to have you with us here today. Without any further ado, let's begin. There are 4 different domains or sections to this test. It doesn't sort the questions like by section, and you'll have no idea what section you're on really when you are taking the exam. But these are the 4 sort of chapters of the test, which are, again, mixed all together. And our very first one is governance, risk, and compliance. This is what I would describe as my management chapter, you know? This is where you're going to be talking about like policies, procedure, legal stuff. It's 20% of the test. In fact, that's one of the big changes I feel like with the current version of this test. They've kind of de-incentivized that. I used to think like it felt like half the test was sort of management. Half the test was very similar, I felt like, to CISSP and its sort of managerial, perspective. They've dialed that back a bit. This test's a bit more technical than I think it used to be, which is kind of cool. Kind of gives it its own little niche to carve out. It's got its own thing going on now, but still, nevertheless, about 1/5 of our test is going to have a managerial focus. So there's going to be some management stuff there relative to domain number 1. Our second domain is about security architecture, and thereby this is heavily focused on like designing secure systems, designing secure networks, and the tools and technologies that go into that, like cloud access security brokers and proxies and firewalls and that kind of stuff. Our security engineering chapter, or domain 3, is 31% of the test. Weighing in at our biggest domain basically means like I'm expecting about 31 or so questions that are focused on this. And that's all about like testing. It's about confirming the systems that you've designed previously are secure and making sure we're meeting requirements. Our last section is security operations. Right? This is very much our incident response like chapter. resolving incidents, resolving compromises, a little bit of disaster recovery stuff in there, but mostly incident response, weighing in at 22%. Right? So these are our four domains. Taking a slight deeper look into what's going on like in each of them, and we'll go in order. Here is the Spark Notes of domain number one. The Spark Notes. All right. There's some exam objectives out there. If you do a quick little Google for exam objectives, I'm sure you can find it. Um, for those with me today, as I said, I posted a link to chat to a cloud folder, a OneDrive cloud folder, and in there you can find a copy of these. But otherwise, you can just Google, SecurityX exam objectives, and you'll find a PDF floating around out there on the internet. This is from CompTIA, and it kind of outlines a little bit about the format of the test and some of the rules of the test and how many questions you get. And right then and there, we can see like those same percentages I shared. But if you work your way down further, like you can see the complete list of all the things that are domain one, a somewhat overwhelming list to take in at any one given moment. But like, I like to say this thing's a pretty good checklist. You should be able to say like, oh, I know what most of these things are as part of, your preparation for the test. Use it as a checklist. But you can see chapter one, albeit kind of our smallest domain, seems to go on for a lot of pages here. It has a lot of bullet points of topics. And then, of course, it goes on to chapter two, domain two, and so forth and so on, which seem to have, that one actually feels like it has more. Some of the later ones feel like they might have less topics. But one way or another, like this is the spark notes of that, trying to make something a little bit more digestible. So domain number one, right? As I mentioned, we're dealing with management stuff. We're talking about policies. We're talking about procedures. We're talking about standards. And we're going to be talking about the importance of a security program and the management of it. A security program sort of being like a long-term thing to help develop the security at your business, make, all-around security better, enhance efficiency, but ultimately like improve our performance, our excellence relative to security. So there's going to be a big discussion too in there about training, and I feel like also the focus is going to be on like social engineering and the fears of that, right? Because that's the best way to combat social engineering, through training. So there'll be a lot of talk about that from a managerial perspective. Beyond that, they're going to get into some frameworks, but they're not going to deep dive them. I mean, like if you really wanted to, you could write a whole book on COBIT. You could write a whole book on ITIL. You could probably write a whole book on SAPSA. We're not going to do that, but we're going to talk about like the pros and cons of the frameworks. Again, they're all just how-to guides on how to do security, and they have a lot to say about how to do the training and how to write the policies and all that. But like an awareness of them is really going to be the focus there. Just to be clear, don't like spend 6 weeks reading about COVID. It's cool, but it's not worth it for this test. Then they talk a little bit about the importance of configuration management, and ultimately they're in asset management. Can't protect things if you don't know you have them. And as that is a critical input to risk management, that's sort of the angle they're going to be approaching it from. Like keep track of your stuff. We then pivot into talking about risk management, quantitative versus qualitative, and how to do the calculations, although I feel like there won't be a lot of that going on. Don't expect like 20 questions where you have to do a quantitative analysis. But there'll be some amount of like, doing risk analysis and understanding what risk means to the business. But I'd say this is probably the thing that can easily go missed in that sort of discussion. Third-party risk and supply chain risk is going to be heavily emphasized in this version of the test, as we've seen multiple compromises with cell phones and pagers and software development companies and so forth, of SolarWinds compromise, supply chain risks, really doing some companies in. So be big emphasis on that. Also in this domain, we get a little bit about threat modeling, the attack matrix, or TTPs from MITRE, and a discussion of like Stride and its complementary dread system. But another one of those ones where like you don't have to go super deep into it as much as have an awareness of why these exist and how we use them. Towards the end, we get some compliance and some mention of more frameworks, but now specifically frameworks that are security centric, like NIST's RMF, the Computer Security Framework, or some of the frameworks from the Cloud Security Alliance. Very conceptual chapter. Very conceptual. Admittedly, making it one of my least enjoyable ones. I'm a technical guy. I like the technical stuff. But all right. It's the management chapter. It's going to be pretty high level. It's going to be mostly conceptual. And we have to have an awareness of pretty much all these concepts with enough detail to be able to do an occasional quantitative analysis for the business. And that's kind of like what we're looking at with domain one. I don't know if there are any thoughts or questions there. Domain two. This is probably my favorite one. I like if I'm not breaking stuff, I like building stuff. I like making stuff, and I feel like that's what the architecture chapter is all about. It's building out systems, it's designing systems. And herein we get a lot of talk about like tools and things that would not only make your systems more resilient, but maybe more redundant, more secure in general against the threats, that we're going to see here today. Systems that are enduring. That's what we're trying to build. So we get talk about like cloud capabilities. We get talk about like how CASBs work and the different ways to use a CASB. We get into a little bit about like shared responsibility models relative to the cloud, who's expected to do what for cloud security. And then it sort of pivots into talking about how automation, Terraform, Ansible, another one of those topics that is pretty new or really freshly emphasized inside this exam, is sort of brought to the forefront. How do you use Ansible? How do you use Terraform to not only keep your cloud patched, but how do you use that to deploy your cloud and all the things therein? We get some talk about cloud security, the concerns about leakage, with a focus here placed on encryption keys. And some of the new, like, post-quantum encryption stuff starts coming up, like homomorphic encryption, and how does that work? We have some talk about, like, different types of controls. What's interesting here is it's honestly, I feel like it's not just for cloud, though. Like, they frame it as cloud control strategies, but most of the tools they're talking about here are the same things that work in a local network. VLANs and firewalls and all that types of stuff, intrusion prevention, anti-malware monitoring. I feel like all of that kind of just gets lumped together under that header. We talk about network architecture, more of the same VLANs and firewalls, and the importance of VPNs and the encryption that will go with them. Security boundaries are talked about, mainly like the difference like between the private network and the internet, and how do you filter what goes from one trust boundary to another, which is a pretty important thing to like consider during design. And we also finally we start acknowledging like deperimeterization and zero trust, which kind of merge these two together. The world has changed. It used to be that everything would be kept in the office, all the important stuff was kept inside the building. But now people work from home more so than ever before, thanks to maybe COVID. But like the perimeter is gone, and now that data is in the cloud and your data is in people's houses and the company's data is all spread out, how are you going to keep that secure? We have to acknowledge that's the reality we live in now. Data is going to be spread out. The perimeter has dissolved. How do we keep all that secure? And do we design a system that can keep things secure even when it's not in our building? I think in short, the answer is you trust nothing, zero trust. Every action is checked and analyzed, but designing systems and all the considerations that go into them are found here in domain two. I'd say domain two feels like it has a little bit of overlap with domain three. But domain three's kind of big gambit is that now you're testing those things to make sure they work. So like, they go hand in hand. The architectures and the engineers are working together. They don't exist in a vacuum. Um, so perspective has changed, but a lot of those same technologies overlap and come up in here as well, which brings up kind of like an interesting point. You could have questions for sure on the test that are part domain two and three simultaneously. This is kind of an interesting thought to have for a split second. But here in domain three, our biggest domain again, we've got discussion of automation again. Quite frankly, that whole Ansible and Terraform and what they do and how they work gets brought in here, as well as scripting and Python and PowerShell and all that kind of stuff, with the addition now of talking about how AI may help with certain parts of that. But also, and I got some respect for CompTIA on this front, the dangers of that as well. I feel like there's a lot of people out there that'll just sell you, sell you, sell you on AI. Oh, it's the future. Oh, it's everything. It's the solution to every problem. It's not though. It's not much more than a predictive text engine. And they kind of are honest about that here, which is a breath of fresh air, I feel like, in the world today where I feel like I'm just being berated by AI marketing constantly. But they talk about how that might influence the automation of your business, and again, the pitfalls of that and the dangers of that, which is kind of cool. We get into talking about vulnerability management and the importance of like scanning and so forth. And there's like kind of a name drop of SCAP here, but we're not going deep into SCAP like they used to. They've actually backed off of that a little bit. They backed off quite a bit here too of like CVSS, I feel like, in part because quite honestly, SCAP and vulnerability scanning really feels like the heart of CYSA, which is a different cert. And most people say you'd have CYSA before you take SecurityX. Like SecurityX is the next one in the chain, and they're probably thinking to themselves, why are we asking the same question twice? They've already done these questions. Why are we asking about it again? So they backed off on that a little bit, which is kind of interesting. But I think vulnerability management and the testing that kind of goes into that still going to be a concept. Just backed off a little. Got to make room for that those AI topics, I guess. They get a little bit into advanced crypto here, which we had crypto in our last part, but now it's more about like how do you properly use the crypto and ensure the crypto is working. A little bit more crypto talk, right? Talk more about protecting data at rest. We talk about full disk encryption. We talk about VPNs again, and we also talk about like TLS and SSH and all the ways to protect your data in transit, which in a lot of businesses is the most vulnerable place. So, how do you protect your data as it crosses the internet? And that comes up a lot in this chapter. And how do you confirm you've got, that encryption that can meet those sort of privacy regulations? Finally, more crypto, but they start getting into like the importance of signing and signatures and hashing and tokenization as an alternative to all that. But like for the purposes of, I mean, yeah, keeping your data secure, but also from the integrity angle, which I don't really feel like is brought up much in domain two. How do you know the software you're installing is legit? Oh, it should be signed or hashed. How do you know that this connection is authentic? Oh, it should be signed or hashed. And how do you know if it's been signed properly? That stuff comes up. If you have any thoughts or questions here. In our last domain, domain four, we get security operations. As I described earlier, the incident response chapter. There's a lot of focus paid on detection and monitoring with a security info event manager, the SIEM. In fact, I would highly expect that probably becomes like a SIM. If it isn't, it should be. Have to read through the logs and identify things that look unusual. Like that feels like something we should be able to do. So there's going to be an emphasis here paid on detection and looking through logs. They're also going to get into in this chapter some specific like vulnerabilities and attacks like cross-site scripts and detecting weak encryption ciphers and things like that. Some small piece of that again feels like it would overlap with the last chapter, admittedly. Um, but more detailed here. Look at a script. Tell me what the problem is. Like someone like an incident response team member would do in the Security Operations Center. There's some discussion about threat hunting and the importance of intelligence, like looking at ISACs, information sharing and collaboration centers, looking at open sourced intelligence and how all that information is shared. But they also add into this, it's kind of like not immediately right up in your face, the importance of like sandboxes and detonation chambers for analyzing like suspicious files. A tool incident response would surely be using, like Cuckoo. Load a file into Cuckoo, see what it reports, see what indicators of compromise exist inside of this, software or not. That's heavily emphasized here. And that's where they kind of bring in a lot of these rule-based languages that are sort of being used to help detect malware in places where signatures aren't immediately useful. So lots of talk about like Yara and Sigma and how they can detect malware. And There's some mentions of snort too, for as far as like intrusion detection and prevention are concerned. And then finally, like what is the incident response process, right? Outside of like the malware analysis. They start talking about like the different steps to incident response and proper recovery and root cause analysis and ultimately lessons learned so that we learn from our mistakes and do better next time. So this is a kind of a breakdown, a spark notes of the topics that you should be expecting to be found inside this test. Again, we'll emphasize a couple that are being now brought up a little bit more, given a spotlight. We'll talk about some things that are kind of being de-emphasized, if not removed, towards the end. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a feel for like the perspective of the test. This exam will be 165 minutes long, and there's no like break, take a break and you get a timer. There's no intermission. 165 minutes. You will be dealing with a maximum of 90 questions, but I would expect it to be closer to like 75, 80, you know, max of 90. Most of these questions are going to be multiple choice. Probably all but like five of them are going to be multiple choice. And of that group, lots of pick one. You know, your classic A, B, C, D. There'll be a few pick twos, you know, maybe like a half dozen. And if you're lucky and you find a four-leaf clover, you found a pick three. But there will be absolutely no pick all that applies or pick nones in the scope of this exam. In fact, to that end, I should say, you know, if you leave it blank, it's automatically wrong. All questions are expected to be answered. Answer all your multiple choice questions for sure. Even if you're not sure what the answer is, get something down, man. But yeah, most of it's multiple choice. So like maybe there's 80 multiple choice questions, right? Then there are the performance-based questions, which are probably the scary part, right? The PBQs. I would expect like 3 to 5 of them, you know, 3 to 5. And well, in that case, maybe assume worst case scenario, there's five. Theoretically, there could be six, there could be seven. They don't really give us any standard numbers, and they agree to, or they acknowledge that they may change this over time. But if we're just going to consider the history of this test, yeah, it's probably like 3 to 5 of them. Now, there are two different types of performance-based questions, and this is the only CompTIA test that's like that. So we should maybe talk about that for a second. There are two types of PBQs. They're the classic simulations that you find on just about every CompTIA test, save for I think it's like there's one of the early tests doesn't have it, and I know Cloud Essentials, which recently got retired, doesn't have it. But just about all of them have simulations, right? And there will be several of these at the start of the exam, like 3 or 4 of them. And you're allowed to skip these and come back to them later, and you can reset them at any time. You know, you kind of get lost, you're in the weeds, you're like, oh, let me start over. You can just hit a reset button. Rarely do I feel like you have time for that, but an option will be there. And some of these would be like dragging and dropping stuff, sorting terms. Some of them you'll be given a problem and there'll be icons you can click on that give you like drop down menus for solutions. But they're pretty much all glorified multiple choice questions, I feel like. You know, like if it's like fix a computer and I click on the computer and there's a drop down menu of 4 options, how is that not an ABCD with pictures? Come on. If they do give you a command prompt, by the way, with these simulations, and they don't tell you what commands are allowed, here's a little secret. You can always type help, and they'll tell you what commands are available. Chances are you'll need most of the commands they give you. They only give you 5 commands. You probably need all of those. But all right, cool. Then there's the virtual environment. Ah, boy. Now that's the real scary one. This is the only test, again, that has that. And I would expect at least one of them. Expect at least one virtual PBQ. They're using a virtual machine that you're connecting to. I don't know where this virtual machine is running, but let's just say there's a virtual machine out on Azure or something. And when you get to this question, which can basically pop up at any point, boom, it makes a connection to the virtual machine. The virtual machine spins up. While the virtual machine's turning on, it probably pauses your timer. But like, for the most part, virtual machine starts up and you're dumped into a virtual environment, which is really cool. Here's the catch, though. With a virtual environment simulation, or maybe we shouldn't use the word simulation, with a virtual environment performance-based question, CompTIA has made it very clear on their blog and their website, you will not be able to come back to these later if you skip them. And you do not have a reset option. So when you get dumped into this, don't hit next and go, oh, I'll come back later. You can't. I think that's done a few people in. Like if you skip it, the virtual machine closes and they're not opening it again. What's neat about the virtual environment is you're being dumped into an actual like running computer, in the cloud, but it's like probably a fully functional operating system, and there might be multiple virtual machines in there that you can interact with. And now when you go to the command prompt, like you have all the commands you would expect. You've got everything. It's as real as it can get, you know. You can probably change, screen resolution. You can adjust settings in the operating system and so forth, um, which gives you a lot of freedom to solve whatever problem they present to you. Give you a lot of freedom to solve the problem however you want, which is cool. But as a general note, only solve the problem they're looking for you to solve, and like confirm you solved it. Verify the fix, but like don't fix anything else. I feel like that's a quick way to end up losing some points or not getting any points at all. Just do only what they tell you to do. If you need this interface to be working, that's all you need to worry about. Don't concern yourself with anything else in there. But yeah, I expect there to be some sort of virtual environment that you get dumped into, and you won't know when it's going to happen, apart from you'll basically see the test pause. There's probably some form of an hourglass, and then in you go. Now, as a blessing, all of the sims have some partial credit on them. Thank God. Can't promise that for practice or for the questions. Pick two may or may not give partial credit, but sims can give partial credit and may be worth more than a single multiple choice question. For example, in one of the sims, maybe there might be like 5 menus you have to select, maybe like what an attack is, or 5 things you have to drag and drop. I have to imagine each one of those is worth similar to a multiple choice question itself. Um, now if you get 4 out of the 5, hey, that's 40 out of 50 points probably. All right. With that said, here's a little bit of a strategy before we look at an example. Because they're so incredibly overwhelming, and sometimes like when you get dropped into one, your heart drops. Just breathe and slowly and carefully read the scenario and the instructions. Ignore the diagrams, ignore whatever weird imagery they're giving you. Just read the scenario and then read whatever instructions there would be. Like there's problem X and you need to fix Y. Okay. Once you've done that, further ease into it by just carefully reviewing and familiarizing yourself with your diagrams or any menus there are. If there's drop-down menus, click on them and look at the options. Before you're even selecting any, just look at what options are there. If there's things you can drag and drop, figure out what's drag and droppable. Click on any of the computers. If they don't look like buttons, click on them anyway. Figure out what you can and can't interact with. We're not even trying to answer it yet. Just familiarizing yourself with it. Then, honestly, reread the scenario and the instructions. Because now you're going to be thinking about what you're just looking at. And pay very close attention to what they're actually asking you to do, because if you do something that's not what they asked, you're probably going to get penalized for that, or you could end up losing your points. Don't do anything that wasn't asked for. And sometimes they explicitly tell you not to do certain things. Like they'll be like, some computers may not have problems. Do not apply fixes to computers that do not have problems. It's like, okay, computers that don't have problems. If you tweak them at all, that's definitely going to cost us. It's actually be like practically getting points for leaving them alone. But reread the scenario and like look for keywords in the scenario, look for keywords in the instructions, and be real clear on what you're supposed to do. Then you can move on. Answer and perform the tasks required as best you can. If you feel like you only know how to do 3 out of the 6 things, well, hey, that might be 3 out of the 6 points. So do what you can, grab the low-hanging fruit. Not everything has to be 100% answered in order to get points here, but do what you can. Once you are done doing what you feel like you can do, honestly, reread the scenario, the instructions. Check your answer against the instructions. Make sure it makes sense, right? And then move on. If at any point you get lost in the weeds or you feel like you've messed something up, hit reset with the one note again that you cannot reset a virtual PVQ. Now, here, you can find this on demosim.comptia.io. It used to have a completely different URL, so they recently moved it. But you can find a demo sim out there on CompTIA's site. They do not advertise this really, but it's out there. And I think this is like a pretty good way if you're not super, familiar with Sims. Pretty good way to get a little familiar with the type of interface you'd be dealing with. And furthermore, just good old-fashioned practice, man. I feel like this is a pretty good example of something we'd be dealing with here. Albeit it's a little bit troubleshooting focused, but there's more than a couple possible, opportunities for that within this exam. So, especially if it relates to like firewalls and things like that, and certainly this one does. So this is worth, I think, checking out. So, what do we see here? After experiencing attacks on its servers, Company A hired a cybersecurity analyst, so they hired some outsider, to configure a DMZ and increase security measures. How much you want to bet there's something wrong with the something that dude configured? Shortly after the network was reconfigured, an assistant on the second floor reported that one of the executives could not access the internet and specifically couldn't access http comptia.org. They're hinting at what we should probably be checking for. Like that's a sign of the problem. If you can't reach CompTIA.org, there's a problem. And we're going to want to try and fix this and then confirm that we fixed it. Said they can send internal emails, they can use the intranet, the private network, and they can print on the local network printer. So we know all of that works, but it's specifically they're having a problem with the internet, and it's somebody on the second floor. Interesting. Instructions, check the IP addresses. So how would you check an IP address, right? That's literally where my head goes. That's one of the things that would get you points. You need to check the IPs. So I'm already trying to break down the instructions. And test connectivity to CompTIA.org on each workstation. Then use that information to ensure that the access control list is properly configured to allow all workstations access to the internet. The router's ACL implements an implicit deny, which basically means anything not listed is automatically denied, right? Only make changes to correct the connectivity issue. If you change something that's not part of the problem, we will be getting docked for that. Not that they really will give you negative points, but you wouldn't be gaining points somewhere, right? At any point, you can hit the reset button. So you see the reset button up here. Now, this question itself, you might want to minimize it or close it. Just bloop, there, it's gone. And we can reopen it later as we feel inclined. But like, you might want to close it so you can see the entire diagram. So I read the instructions. I'm going to check my diagram. It looks like, click, click, nothing, nothing, nothing. It looks like I got a button here. Yeah, a router. And we can see their IPs, the interfaces, and we can see, there's the access control list that the technician, that outsider had set up. So there's something wrong with this for sure. And then I'm guessing these are buttons. Workstation 1, Workstation 2. You could theoretically have both of them open at the same time. As a general note, though, like there seems to be boundaries on these exercises, much like in the real test. So it's kind of you have very little bit limited screen real estate, I'm afraid. But there are 2 workstations, and I can clearly access their command prompts by clicking on them. Okay, so I got 2 workstations here, and I got a router, and I apparently don't have very much on anything else that I can click on. Yeah, no, that's it. Okay, so now I familiarized myself with the diagram. I'll go back to the question. What do they want me to do? Check the IP addresses on, I'm guessing, the only places I can. I mean, like the router, I can already see them. There's the IP addresses on the router. I guess they want me to do that on the workstations. So I can go to the workstations. Now, if I'm like, ooh, I don't remember the command, what can we type? We can type help. And if you hit help, we don't have a lot of options. We have ipconfig, we have ping, and we have exit. All right. ipconfig. Cool. Now I've checked the IP address of workstation number 1, their device number 68. Okay. If you take the test at a testing center, they'll give you a dry erase board. And this would be something like I would make note of on my dry erase board. I feel like the more information you take note of here, the better. Let's say that's workstation 68. All right. Workstation number 2. All right, there it is. 192.168.0.82. So workstation 2, ditto, is 82. I also can't help but notice they're in, 255, 255, 255, 224, slash 27. So they're doing some classless subnetting here. There's something going on with subnets. All right, so we've checked the IP address of each. As far as I'm concerned, that's probably points right there just by typing in ipconfig. Now let's test the connectivity to CompTIA.org. You might also note, I'm just going through the instructions in order, as you should. That takes a lot of the edge off when it comes to these SIMs. Just like a list of things to do. Test connectivity. All right. I could go ahead and ping other devices in the network, but I think most importantly, I'd probably want to ping CompTIA.org. You told me about that in the premise of the question. Workstation number 1 has no problem whatsoever pinging CompTIA.org, so this guy's good, and I'm not going to do anything with him. As far as I'm concerned, I'm done with workstation 1. Again, don't want to fix nothing that's not broken. Workstation number 2, on the other hand, okay, let's have them ping CompTIA. Specifically said CompTIA.org up there, so I'll ping specifically CompTIA.org. We found our problem. So workstation number 2 has an issue. All right, cool. So it's specifically a problem with workstation number 2. And I'm guessing relative to their IP address, because there's like nothing else here I can do. All right, we check connectivity to CompTIA.org on each workstation. Done. Use the information to ensure that the access control list is properly configured. All right, to the ACL we go. All right. Now I'm going to be specifically looking in this access control list for something that would relate to the issue for computer 82. Number 82. Maybe like 2 seconds here. We'll continue. All right. Let's see here. We see this guy, 192.168.0.64 with a slash 27. Slash 27 is given increment of what, 32? So that should be like 64 to 95. Yeah, a little bit of subnetting knowledge might be needed. Not a lot, though. I feel like it rarely comes up in the scope of most tests that aren't networking centric, but doesn't hurt to know a little bit about subnetting here at this level. So 64 to 95. Okay, well, that would include workstation 2. And they're apparently allowed to go, what, anywhere with anything as long as they're going to this destination, and that would be accepted. How much you want to bet the website, CompTIA.org, is not part of this destination? How would I check? I'll just go right to the workstation. Who are they pinging? Right? CompTIA.org is 192.0.2.6. Yep, okay. Therein lies our issue. The website we're trying to go to, CompTIA.org, is not part of this destination range, so this rule isn't applicable. Right? That's how firewalls work. They check the first rule, and if the sources and destinations match, then they perform the action, which would be accept. But the destination doesn't match where we're trying to go, so this rule isn't being checked. And then they would check the next rule, which is what I would do. 192.168.0.64/27 can go anywhere with TCP or UDP for port 22 or 3389, but it will be denied, or at least in this case, if that range tries to go anywhere with 22 or 3389, they would be denied. Okay, all right. But we're not using 222 or 3389. Port 22 is SSH, 3389 is remote desktop. We're not doing either. I have to imagine a ping. Pings don't have port numbers, shouldn't be filtered by that rule at all. So it wouldn't be applicable. We're not using TCP or UDP. We don't have port numbers for a ping. I'm also thinking though that the employee on the second floor, the associate on the second floor, was probably using HTTP, and that's port 80. This rule wouldn't apply. Rule only applies to those two port numbers. So skip it. Rule number 3, anyone can go here with TCP 80 and 443. That would be accepted. Yeah, as the issue though, the CompTIA website is not in this range, which would be 32 to 65 in that fourth octet. We're not in that range. That's not going to work for us. Like, if CompTIA's website was part of this destination, we'd be able to get there, but it's not. Next up, number 4, anyone can go to this range with ICMP. Rather, more specifically, it's denied, right? Anyone going here with ICMP is denied. Yeah, I don't think that rule applies either, though, because again, our destination is not part of this range. So again, another one, we strike it out. And we're going down until we find a rule that would be applicable to our poor computer 82. How about number 5? 192.168.0.80 with a /28. This would create a range from 80 to 95. 16 addresses, 80 to 95. Anyone from 80 to 95, which would include our second computer at 82, anywhere they go with anything, including ping, with any port number, is denied. Oh, that's definitely it. Yeah, that's us. We're inside that range, and we're trying to go anywhere with anything, it's denied. That's the rule that's causing us problems. Right? So kind of like just like a firewall would, we read down the list. We said, this one's not applicable to us. This one's not applicable to the computer having a problem. This one's not applicable. This one's not applicable. And because none of those rules are applicable to us, we're not part of the IP ranges, or we're not using the port number shown, like none of those rules would affect us. And we know the router would skip those rules. But this rule number 5 is definitely something that would affect us because we are part of the range there. We are part of that 192.168.0.80/28. Going anywhere, you get denied. Okay, that's the issue. Now they want us to fix this, right? Use the information to ensure the access control list is properly configured to allow all workstations access to the internet. This is getting in the way of that. And they don't give me a lot of things here, but I'm guessing these little colored buttons here are buttons we can press. So maybe we'll click on that. And we've deleted that rule. That rule's gone now. Right? There's a little, we click it again to bring it back, but like we've disabled rule number 5. We want to see if that works. You can always go to that computer and try again. Workstation number 2 can ping CompTIA now. Okay, I made one little change, no extra changes. I've solved the problem. I think I'm good. We only made changes to correct the connectivity issue. At that point, you'd hit the next button. On this example, we can hit submit, and it will calculate our score. And we scored 4 out of 4. So that'd be like 40 points. Naturally, again, the test doesn't actually tell you that in real life. It wouldn't tell you whether you got it right or wrong, but like that's how I would approach it. So I read the instructions, I familiarized myself with the diagram, and then I reread the instructions. While looking at the instructions, I went through the instructions step by step and only did what they asked for. I performed some tasks, I did some IP configs, I did some pings, and then I changed the firewall and I checked that my change worked. I have to imagine those are actually the 4 things. I double checked it with my eyes and then I moved on. That's how I'd go about it. Now, I think for the scope of this test, we want to not just be able to do a little bit of troubleshooting with Windows, but we want to honestly be able to do a little troubleshooting with Linux. So I highly recommend getting a copy of Linux up and running. I really, really do. I think this is very important. Now, of all the different distros, I mean, you choose whatever you like, but I think I would go with Ubuntu on account of it's free. Um, you know, no need to complicate matters. And it's pretty popular, so it gets lots of updates. I would try Ubuntu out. And I get that up and running. If you don't have a computer, you can run Ubuntu on as your operating system, consider virtual machines. You know, use VMware Workstation, which is free, or Oracle VirtualBox. And once you've got that enabled, and assuming your computer can handle virtualization, run Ubuntu inside of that. But get a copy of Linux up and running because we need to be really good with that. In fact, you arguably even better with Linux here than we would with anything Windows related. Um, Here are some commands that I highly recommend familiarizing yourself with. Use the manual command to learn more about these other commands. Like if I type manual if config, I can then see how to use if config. Get real comfortable with doing that. That way, especially if you end up using a command or needing a command that isn't something that you are familiar with, you can at least open the manual and look at it. Get familiar with the top command so you can see what processes are running and what's taking the most memory. LSOF, sudo, chmod, chown, in case you need to take ownership of a file. Like all of these commands here feel like really useful. Systemctl to turn things off and on. Sort of like controls what boots and doesn't boot, what processes and services are running. Play around with PS and some of its options like PS-A, PS-EF. Use the kill command. Learn how to terminate processes gracefully with option 15, abruptly and violently with number 9. Learn how to kill processes and get comfortable doing that. Use netstat. Netstat is a very powerful tool with what almost feels like an overwhelming number of options, but you don't have to memorize all the options because you can always break out manual netstat to look at the list. But nevertheless, netstat, very powerful. Be familiar with netstat and be familiar with some of its more classic options like A, which shows you everything, N, which resolves port numbers and names to, well, like HTTP will instead show its number. Instead of the name of a website, you'll get the IP address. And dash P, which helps you see the processes needed or the processes that opened various network connections. Yeah, get real familiar with netstat. And wouldn't be a bad thing to check out IP tables or the new version of it. Um, for modifying like the host-based firewall. Pretty much all of those things are built in. Might have to install Nmap. But I think that's also a good one to play with and get used to using the Nmap command for network scans. Another one where I'd say, though, similar to like netstat, you don't have to perfectly memorize every single type of scan. I don't think that's necessary, but you know the manual command, you can always look up a specific scan if they instruct you to do a certain type of scan. Really important, though, for these performance-based questions, I think, on this test, get familiar with Linux and be familiar with these commands. This is not, of course, an exhaustive list, but I feel like this is a good starting point, and I would feel like this list of commands, I got a pretty good shot at doing most of the things that would be needed. Be ready for some Linux. Now, to prep for the test, you're going to want a practice test. And really, that's very important here. You're going to need a practice test. I feel like tests are two things. Knowing the facts is one part of it. That's one thing. But then there's this other part that we don't always put enough emphasis on. And it's like the logic and reasoning and how you're reading and process eliminating through the questions. And you really have to be good at both. Like you have to know the facts, but you also have to be good at answering questions and deciphering their meaning. And if you got one and not the other, we're not going to pass. So we got to get a practice test, and we need to make sure we're practicing both of those things, the knowledge side, but also how we're approaching and reading the questions. And that is critical. I know more than a few people. I'd say brilliant, brilliant, very smart folk. But they're not good at deciphering questions, and that makes the tests harder for them than it ought to be. And it's definitely cost them some passes. So get a practice test and get good at reading questions. Make sure you're focusing on why the wrong answers are wrong. That way you get more out of the questions. Don't just focus on, oh, the answer is A. It's A. I'll remember it's A. That's not going to help. Figure out why the wrong answers are wrong. This polishes your process of elimination and helps you get really honestly more out of the question because there's certainly more wrong answers than anything else. Focus on why the wrong answers are wrong. Then you can worry about why the right answer is right. It's really what I like to do. I go through questions and I say, this one's wrong for this reason. This one's wrong for that reason. This one's wrong for that reason. And after I've eliminated all of the answers with creative arguments, then I explain why the right one is right. Right? And this helps me focus on the logic behind the questions and how I'm doing my process elimination, which is a skill we have to have for the test. But I think like this is a good starting point. Past that, use the exam objectives as an additional checklist. You know, um, ideal world, you want to be able to go through that checklist, that exam, list of exam topics that I showed earlier and is shared in that link in chat. And again, you can just Google this, CompTIA SecurityX exam objectives and find the PDF. But like use this as a checklist and make sure you feel like you could describe all the things that are on here. If you see one of them and you're like, I don't know what this is. What is stride? There's something we need to do a little research and learn about, you know? Ideally, you want to be able to know all the things that are on that list. And beyond that, get some of that Linux practice in with some of those commands. And you'll be in a pretty good spot. I think the most important thing, though, to do is to make sure you're avoiding procrastination. Set a deadline and force yourself to study. And once you commit to a date, there should be no dates off or days off. It's like being on a diet. It's like learning a new language. If you take a week off, you're doing so much damage and you've gone 30 steps back. So set a deadline, force yourself to study, and then say, all right, every day we're going to spend an hour. Every day we're going to spend 2 hours or whatever, and keep with it. When do you set that date, though? Well, try to avoid setting a date when you have an important plan immediately or before after it. I'd warned a couple students who I feel like really sabotage themselves by being like, I'm going to test the day after Christmas. I'm going to test the day before New Year's. And I'm like, it's like the busiest time of the year. What are you doing? You're going to be so distracted by all the other things going on. You're going to be thinking about what you're supposed to be doing after the test. You're going to have family just chatting at you. It's going to be hard to focus. Don't try to set a day aside that's like, this is the day I'm testing, and I got nothing going on either side of it, so I have nothing else I have to immediately think about. No distractions. You don't want any distractions. And certainly you want to be able to set the day of your test for like, I would say earlier in the day for most people, and wherein you'd be able to get a good night's rest beforehand. Oh, that is so critical. That's so critical, especially when you get hit in the face at the beginning of the test with those sims. You don't want to be sleep deprived and panicked. You want to be a cool, calm, collected customer. And that comes from a good night's rest. But like, if you are self-studying and you want a relaxed pace, my personal go-to would be like a week for each domain. I spend a week on domain one, and then a week on domain two, and then three, and then four. And then optionally, I could spend a fifth week maybe reviewing my weak points, and then I need to get in there. None of this like I'm going to take 6 months to a year, because at the end of like 6 months or a year, one, you're not going to remember what you started with. I wouldn't. And second, there's way too many chances there for life to get in the way and sabotage you. I feel like a 1 month window is reasonable. You can focus for a month, but more than that, life will find a way. Life will find a way to distract you. We'll say, well, that doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy inside. I don't feel like that's enough time. You're never going to feel warm and fuzzy about it, and you're never going to feel 100% ready. In fact, that feeling of 100% ready is a lie anyway. That'll get ripped away from you the first second you hit a sim that looks even weird and confusing. Like, don't bother with that. Focus up, set a deadline, get in there. And like worst case, you don't pass, but hey, every failure comes with a score sheet that tells you what topics to work on. And that's a study guide that you can, dig into. And you can say, oh, all these terms I wasn't familiar with and so forth. Polish those up and then take it again. Now, if you are going to take a class, and I do recommend that, of course, attempt to take the test quickly after class. You wait more than 2 weeks, you wait more than a month, and you're going to start forgetting important things. Procrastination is our enemy. As far as instruction resources go, as we're starting to come to the end of this, I would say I'd be remiss if I don't bring up training camp. Training camp has some self-paced online training if you're the type that wants to do things at your own time, 1 in the morning, or at weird times, there's some options for that. We also have instructor-led training where you take a week and be it in person or virtual, we walk you through it step by step, every step of the way. And these options would include the CompTIA books, but also the practice exams and materials and some example labs and the like. Outside of that, CompTIA has their own stuff, several options through CertMaster that aren't too bad, coming with lots of practice examples and labs. And you may also find that there are other solutions out there, Dion and so forth. But be careful, there's a lot of resources out on the internet that are for version 4 of the test, and they haven't updated the web page. It's like, get your CompTIA, stuff here. And the test is for version 4. That was the last version of the test. Not that enough has changed to mean that that material's useless, but you want to be aiming for the current version of the test, which is 005. So keep an eye out for that if you decide to go hunting. Um, you're looking for 005, the current version. And that's our SecurityX, which this is not an exhaustive list, but here are some things that they've added that weren't really brought up in the old version at all. The AI topics and how to secure AI, there's now a big focus put on automation and Ansible and Terraform, and there's a lot of talk about the threat detection with Yara and Sigma. Um, we want to see questions about that, so that's why we should probably looking for a version, 005 test. They also expanded on in the current Security Acts the importance of SBOMs or software bill of materials, the importance of your supply chain hardware assurance, SASE, Vscaler, SDN, post-quantum cryptography, the future of crypto. I'm not talking about crypto coins, but we're talking about how do I put it? The Kyber's crystal, Kyber's dilithium, some of the new quantum-proof cryptographies. They're also talking a lot about the importance of virtual TPMs, and especially as it relates to the cloud, and the sandboxing with all that malware and threat analysis stuff like YAR and Sigma. So these are some topics that are getting extra emphasis in the current version. Now they say that they've de-incentivized or removed, depending on how you want to look at that, de-incentivized or removed the following. Um, so for those who have older study material, which again isn't necessarily the worst thing ever, if you did have a version 4 practice test, most of it's still good, but I would dissuade you away from worrying about these topics. Um, Total cost of ownership, return on investment's been de-incentivized. The MTTRs, mean time to recoveries, and mean time between failures as business metrics has been de-incentivized. Less talk about DDoS protection, less talk about field programmable gate arrays and application-specific integrated circuits, if not entirely removed. We're not talking much about Modbus anymore or CAN buses, like industrial control has been dialed back a little bit. Decoy systems and honeypots, camera surveillance, visitor logs, the threats of vendor lock-in, the importance of job rotation and network taps, and even SCAP and CVSS have all been either removed or de-incentivized, they say. Will they come back? Will they be introduced in a future version of the test? Maybe. Who knows? But what I do know is they're kind of dialing those back. And here's part of the reason I think either these things are no longer something that, is at the forefront of a security practitioner's mind, or they're thoroughly covered in all the tests that come before this, and asking the same questions again seems like a waste of our time. So they're dialing those topics back just to give an idea of how the test has kind of evolved. Curious to see where it goes next. Now that brings us to the end of my formally scheduled presentation here, which took us pretty much exactly an hour. I know we started a minute or two late there to make sure we could get everybody with us. Um, do you have any thoughts or questions? I'm here to help if you've got anything I can assist you with.
I do have one. I just wanted to
Sure.
make sure I know that CompTIA has a whole lot of different certifications. So I'm more
Indeed, they
familiar
do.
with the Security Plus. So you mentioned
Mhm.
the Security X and then the CASP. So I wanted to see if there's a difference between, the three. I know you meant Security X versus CASP. Are you really referring to the Sec Plus or what? Just
Hmm,
wanted to make sure that what the exam really, what's entitled now. Okay.
sure. Yeah, so Security Plus, kind of CYSA and Pen Test are here in the middle. And then there's SecurityX, which formerly would have been called CASP. So CASP is the old name for SecurityX.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
So it is a separate test for the Sec Plus versus the CAS
Yes,
then.
yes, indeed.
Okay.
They're not related. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, so Security Plus is like the
hmm
first test we expect people to take, and it's
Take
the
first.
intro exam
hmm
um, to security, right?
Okay.
Once you've got your intro out of the way, once you've got Security Plus, then we usually recommend as like part of the pipeline that you would move to a tier two cert like CYSA or Pen Test, and that would come second.
Okay.
The CYSA is kind of the blue team stuff. It's defense, it's finding attackers, it's using scanners, it's
hmm
looking for malware, it's that focus. Pen test is the other side. It's all offense. How do things get broken? What do the bad guys do? What are the weapons the bad guys use? Either, either's fine. Although I think a lot of people say that the pen test is a bit considered a bit more challenging. But in either regard, you're either defense or you're offense, and that's
hmm
sort of the next step in kind of the logical progression here. The
Oh, you're
last
getting
option,
both of those in section three? I mean, section two, you're getting both the
yeah,
offense and the defense. Good.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah. You
Good.
can you can get
Okay.
you can do either. You can do either depending on like what your passion is. Do you want to be an analyst and who's somebody who, erects defenses, or do you want to be somebody who tests security? Do you want to be a pen tester who does the offense work? Yeah.
hmm
And then at the highest level, which is considered the mastery, like master's degree, like highest possible level here, that's where we find Security X, which used to be called CASP. When it was CASP, it was called the 004 was its version number, and now we're dealing with the 005.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful because I teach a different variety of different cybersecurity courses at the college, and students are always
Nice.
asking for the certifications. We do provide um, the A plus, Net plus, and Security plus training
Nice.
for the students, and they get it free.
That's cool.
So I'm looking at modifying our courses so that they would, like, we have one that focuses on the help desk where they get the 1201 and 1202 for the A
Mm,
plus. But I'm looking, and we have security, we have TCP IP courses, all networking related. So and that would help them with the Net plus. But I'm looking at now to modify courses that might give them something for the offense and maybe the
mm,
defense. And so that
right
would help
on.
them now to prepare. Okay. I don't think they'll be ready by the end for the cast, but they after they get some training and maybe
For
some
sure.
hands-on, then they'll be able to take maybe that third level. Thank you. That was really helpful.
You're welcome. I'm glad to help.
Okay. All right. Great. And I have your link, so I've downloaded, and so
Sweet.
we'll be providing. Thank you. You're
There you
excellent
go.
professor, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
that. Okay. Do you teach outside of your business
These days, I mainly spend my time with training camp. Yeah.
training camp? Okay, good.
Mhm.
Good. All
They
right.
take good care of me.
Okay. And do you have a link for training camp also that we can go and
Yeah,
look?
yeah. In the PDF that was today's webinar, I put several links.
Okay.
Um, on this page, those are actually all links. Um, but I can provide you a link right now.
Okay. And you have the PowerPoint, you have that also as one of the downloads. That's
Yeah,
the
that's a PDF that's listed as SecurityX webinar. Yep.
okay, no problem. I saw that. Okay, thank you. And the links are, they're hot links in the PDF then.
Hmm.
Great,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to make it as easy as possible. You're
Oh, we appreciate that. I try to do the same for my students. Great, thank you.
quite welcome. Yeah, and I dropped a link to the main site there in the
Excellent, thank
chat.
you.
You're welcome.
And I think some students would, they would appreciate that, and just people that they would appreciate some of the self-paced ones, and others they need that face to face.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's why I like doing the instructor-led training the most because I actually
Yeah.
I get to I did that yesterday. Like my one of my classes
Mm-hmm.
came to a conclusion and we spent like the last couple hours just going through practice questions together and getting some like, just discussion going. And
Mm-hmm.
I think being able to actually have a person to talk to and, say, I'm not understanding this topic or I'm having a problem with this concept and having somebody there who's actually like, you know, can respond. The video, a
Right.
YouTube video doesn't respond, is really cool and rewarding both for them and for me. I love helping. So
Okay.
it's
All right. And
enjoyable.
they have the different price ranges on the link that you provided, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Most of it's dependent on how long the class is more than anything else,
Mm-hmm.
or how insane the vouchers are.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the cost also varies if you decide like, oh, we're going to source our own vouchers. We don't need training camp to include them with the class,
I
like
gotcha.
just
Okay.
prices.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know they also do lots of discounts too if you have like larger groups.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
What about educational institutions? Anybody
oh, I'm
who
sure they
has a
have. Yeah, I'm sure they
for
have
that? Okay.
discounts for them. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And they have discounts for military and first responders, and this goes
Okay.
on.
Oh, good.
Um,
Teachers are considered first responders now, right?
that sounds right to me.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, and if you have like a large enough group, they'll even send me to you in person, which is
Okay.
cool.
All
Yeah, I get
right.
to travel
Perfect.
sometimes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
Yeah, right. You have a great rest of your day.
You as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Guess that concludes our show for the day. Take care and be well.